Hey everybody, it's Nathan with the Birds and the Lees coming at you from our dining room where we are in hunker down mode with coronavirus 2020. Kim and I are trying to decide what we're going to do for the next few weeks because apparently we can't have church. So yeah, it looks like till May 1st.
We're a little out of sorts.
We are a little bit out of sorts, but hey, you know what? We thought this is a great time to get more podcasting done, more time for us to tell our story, get into some different topics. And so we really appreciate everybody who's been listening with us, who's been hanging with us through this whole story. So just real quickly to give you a recap where we left off. Where we left off was we were pretty much in our second year of a church that we'd been at in Pittsburgh. We had transferred. I'd gone for a new job in Pittsburgh. And in that time, we found out that Kim's dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and that held on for several years, but then ultimately he passed away in April of 2010, the day after our son was born. And if you were with us last time, you know that we talked about just kind of the feeling and the sinking. In fact, I titled the episode Earthquakes and Aftershocks because, you know, it's this earthquake that you feel like the whole world is falling apart. And when you get through it, you come back and you feel as if, okay, you know, we've made it through this. There's really only way we can go is up. And I think that's kind of how we were feeling, right? I mean,
I think as a couple, we took off about really a year to just not do a whole lot and kind of triage our heart and get back to a place where we were together and one as a couple. We weren't living separate lives, trying to have a baby and all those things. So, and to clarify that, if you're just jumping in, we weren't having separate lives trying to have a baby. Kim wasn't off trying to have a baby with somebody else. Actually, what had happened was that we ended up, because your dad being ill, we ended up living apart a lot while you took care of him. So when Garrett, our son, was born, we're finally back together as a family, and you know, in that place where you're right, we did a little triage. We took some time and spent that together as a family, and we felt like things were moving pretty well. In fact, we had, going into 2011, we had a great first birthday for our son. We felt like things were really, that was the sweetest birthday.
It was really fun. We had a lot of friends there. You know, our friendships were growing.
We were finally able to be in one place.
We were
start to really pour into those relationships.
Yeah, we were able to do that, and really felt like this was where we belonged, where God brought us, and He was finally bringing some stability to the situation, and He was working, and I felt like our relationships at work were getting better.
Right.
And then we roll into the summer of 2011.
It's always an active time for pastors.
Yeah, it is. In fact, where the next part of our story goes is probably the one that, if I had to pick, was, obviously your dad's death was very impactful, but if we had to pick something that marked the last 9 years of our marriage, 9 now.
Yeah.
It's going to be this. This has been the ripples in the pond. You throw a rock in, there's a huge explosion, and then there's just these ripples that keep going. And
right.
And we feel like this is the thing that has been the most, that's had the most impact on us. But
and truthfully, the thing that kind of had us start this.
Yeah, I mean, this is really what drove us to do this podcast. And I do want to make one disclaimer. We seem to be having a few recording issues tonight, so we're going to do our very best. But if the audio is a little bit wonky, we do apologize. So before we get into the story, so I'm not even sure who should. I feel like I should be the one to tell this because the first person experience really comes down to me, and then obviously you're looking at it from your position.
Sure. I'll just interject when I think there's...
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, and I think you do need to spend some time interjecting from your side, because often that's the side that's you don't hear much about. But
right.
So we roll into 2011, and as you know, spring 2011 generally tends to be the time, in particular with churches, because our calendar years are kind of wonky. I always found that in the churches I worked in, spring was a time you were doing, performance reviews and things like that. And I think we mentioned before that the time at the church we were at was very different. We had a hard time assimilating, I think, to the whole city of Pittsburgh with the people.
Yeah.
It was a little bit difficult, but I felt like we were in a place where we were making strides. We had friends. Mm-hmm. We had made relationships with students that were good. There was good ministry happening. And, I felt like I was pretty confident that we were going to be there for a while. But sometimes when, you feel like, okay, things are pretty stable, that's when your guards let down.
Yeah.
And I remember very distinctly, sitting in a performance review and feeling like, it was pretty good. There were some things to work on, but
got a little bit of a raise.
And interestingly enough, there was always a bit of unease at my time there. I always kind of felt on the defensive with a lot of things.
Yep.
And some things, obviously I have to take responsibility for some of those things and choices that I made being the reason why I felt that way.
Yeah. We'll talk about later about some of the choices we could have made that were better on our end.
Yeah, we could have done that. We can do that down the road. And so I remember sitting in this performance review and feeling, that things were going well. And we had a trip planned coming up. We were going to one of those big Christian music festivals, a live festival. We were taking students. And I remember because it was such a great trip.
Do you know what I remember about that?
What about it?
Our son would not sleep through the night.
Oh, yeah, because Dad was gone and I couldn't help. What I do remember is it rained most of the time, and I ended up sleeping in a tent underneath a canopy because it was just the only way I could stay dry. And
for the record, your wife made that suggestion.
Your wife did my wife did make that suggestion, and it was a good time. We had a smaller group, but we had there was a moment in that trip. And it's one of those interesting, weird moments where I started to feel completely on the outs. Mm-hmm. And, I just felt like something's wrong. Something is really, really wrong. In fact, I had a little, blow up at the middle school director who was with us, who I'd hired a couple of years before. And we always had gotten along and done really well. We were friends. But I just remember there was this moment when we were there where I suddenly felt like I didn't belong or it was just weird, right? And this is the middle of a week in June, I believe.
And I remember you coming back and saying that.
Yeah, I felt like there was something really strange. It just this feeling kind of overwhelmingly hit me. And we had a great week the rest of the week there. We had kids who believed in Jesus, got saved, came to know Christ. It was awesome. In fact, I remember going back and telling the senior pastor how great a weekend it was. And we saw all of this amazing stuff happen.
And this was the week right before VBS.
Yes,
right?
It was. We had come back on a Saturday, I think, and VBS was on a Monday.
That's right.
And at this church, it was kind of a tradition for the entire staff and everybody to be involved in VBS in some way, whether we were doing big room teaching, things like that. So we were all involved in it, and we get through the first day of VBS. It was awesome. It was great. I'm sitting in my office because we would do a half day of VBS and then we'd work the rest of the day. And we've got big events coming up in the summer, so it's an opportunity for me to get some work done on it. And I remember my boss coming in, and he's a great guy. I think we said that in the previous episode. Awesome guy to this day. Just tons of respect for him and love him to death. He's such a great person. Whole family's awesome. And I remember him walking in, and I could tell immediately that on his face, there was something not right.
This was Monday.
This was Monday.
Yeah.
So we'd come back on Saturday. There might have been a week in between, but I think it was only a couple of days. I'm getting to that point in life where I can't remember very well. Yeah. But I do remember distinctively certain things, and this was one of them. I remember him walking in, shutting the door, and kind of standing there. And I said, is everything okay? And I remembered his words were, well, I thought we could get out ahead of this.
Yeah.
But he said, we are going to need you to step down as soon as you can find a new job or by December 31st. And this is 2011.
Yeah.
And, there's this very surreal moment where all of a sudden you're sitting there going, what do you mean? I just moved my family. Well, truthfully, the first thing that popped into my mind was, what did I do wrong?
Right.
Because that is, if you're going to be released from a job, and I'm going to try to use the least harsh language I possibly can. I was fired.
Yeah.
I was fired.
Yeah.
And I remember asking, did I do something? you know, because in my mind, I'd just come off of a pretty decent performance review, and, you know, I'm starting to think, okay, you know, what happened and what did I do wrong? And I remember him saying, you know, you didn't do anything wrong. You just don't fit.
Yeah.
And, you know, I remember sitting there holding that in my hand going, I have no idea what to do with this. And to his credit, let me be very clear that my boss delivering this message, it was very visibly affecting him. It was like, I mean, he walked in like he was carrying a car on his shoulders.
Yeah.
You know, we're friends. We had developed this friendship while I was there, and I could tell that this was definitely something that was really eating at him, because and honestly, I can tell you that when I left that day, I looked and he was actually walking across the parking lot on a walk to go have some alone time,
which was not typical.
Yeah, and he was just out, and, you know, big outgoing, you know, he's an outgoing guy, great big personality, and he was walking away, and I'm like, okay, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
This is really hitting him hard. And I mean, it was a big deal to begin with. You know, you get fired from a church, that's a big deal. And you know, I asked him, you know, I don't even remember, all I remember asking him or saying to him was, well, I need to go home. You know, I said, I need to go home.
Yeah. And they were, just for record, they were real sticklers on being in office at certain hours.
Letting you know where you were and all this. And I just said, I got to go home. And he said, no, I totally get it. Go.
Yeah.
So, and it was almost the end of the day. I mean, we were only 45 minutes or so. So I remember getting in the car and thinking to myself, how in the world am I going to tell Kim? I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So I called my dad and let him know, and I was upset. I was like, Dad, I just got fired. I just moved my family across the country, and, you know, I have a son who's just born, and my daughter's getting ready to go into kindergarten, and I just got fired, and I have no idea what to do.
Right.
And I don't even know how I'm going to tell Kim. I just failed at this. And I remember telling him, I just failed at being a pastor. And because, you know, that's kind of you always put that benchmark. And it was interestingly enough, a year before, really funny story, a year before, they had kind of put some staff relationship, mentorship kind of things with another pastor with me, who had, you know, been there, and he was doing a little bit of mentorship. He'd been doing it for a while. And he asked me, he said, what's the one thing you're afraid of most? I said, the one thing I'm afraid of most is losing my job. Yeah. I said, to me, that would be the worst thing in the world, is to fail at this.
Yeah.
And I remember him saying, well, you know, even if you did, what would happen? I was like, well, I'd survive. It's not like I'm dying,
right?
But it's hard. Yeah. And then all of a sudden I find myself in this situation. And, you know, to this day, I wonder if you know, I held on to that ideal so much of this being successful at being in ministry that, you know, maybe God allowed that to be taken away from me so that I could, and I do think there was a humbling there. I do think there was a real significant, you know, cutting down, for lack of a better word, where I had to really remember, you know, one, why I'm called to ministry, why I feel that this is where God wants me, why I believe this is where he wants me, but also why I can't do this by myself.
Yeah.
You know, this is not something I do on my own. And
I think moving forward, it's important that the reason we're doing this is because through this process, we find out that how this all went down, we are not alone in.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the sole reason why we do the podcast. The podcast, we want to minister to people who this right. You know, who are in situations that we've experienced. And we know that even at the time, what somebody described it as an epidemic of pastoral firings. And there were studies done. And if you've ever been in that position, if you're one of those guys who's out there or women who are in a ministry position where you suddenly found yourself on the outs, we know how it feels.
Yeah.
It's like losing your family.
It is.
It's like a divorce. It's like being disowned. It's what it feels like.
It's like a divorce where the parents take the kids to live in Alaska from Texas, and you're just there.
And this is not to say that there are ways that can be handled well, and there are loving churches out there that handle situations like this. But all too often, I think what ends up happening is there's just this amputation of a person, and knowing that this is an environment where we are, not only are we with each other during the workday, but our families are part of what's going on.
Right.
And so anyway, I call my dad and I'm sitting there going, what do I do with this? I'm sounding very mellow saying it, but trust me, there was a lot of melodrama going on.
A lot of emotion.
There were a lot of emotions. And he said, here's what you do. He said, you do your job better than you've ever done it in your entire life.
Yeah.
So that they know and that you can walk out of there knowing you did your very best regardless of their decision.
Yeah.
And I was like, and that kind of brought me back down. And he said, and then you go home and you tell your wife that you're going to take care of them.
Yeah.
In this situation, you don't know what's going to happen, but you're going to do your best, and and remind her that God is going to take care of us, and remind her that we are not. He is not going to abandon us. And so I remember walking into the garage. You were unpacking boxes.
No, I was putting together our first play set.
Oh, that's right. You were putting together the playground we had just bought for our daughter for this beautiful yard we had.
We had worked on for 2 years.
2 years we'd worked. We were in this place where we were finally settled. We had, and we were going to put this playground together for her. And I walked in, and I remember just breaking down crying and saying, I got fired.
Mm-hmm.
They want me to be gone. They want me to go.
Yeah.
I don't know why. And from what's interesting is from that point to the next day, I don't remember a whole lot.
I only remember calling my mom.
You called your mom. I do know what happened in that time.
Yeah.
You called your mom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was very quick. Yeah.
It was very quick. You called your mom. I talked to you. We took a deep breath.
Yeah.
And then we went to the mall.
Yeah.
We went to the mall, and I bought a pair of Keens because I'd always wanted one. And there was almost like this, forget it, man. I'm just going to go, there was almost like this throw caution to the wind. And it was like, this is going to be my one moment to throw caution to the wind. And then
because we knew the next 6 months or so.
It's going to be hard. So we're going to do it right now. Yeah. And we're talking, $70, $80, right? Yeah. We're going to throw caution to the wind for this one night, and then it's buckle down. And that's what we did. Other than that, I don't remember a whole lot. I don't remember going to bed, but I do remember walking in the next morning and leaving the house and thinking, how am I going to walk in there? Because there's only a few people. Like, this hasn't been announced to the church.
Right. It's very, very
under the radar.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, how in the world am I going to go back to VBS?
Right.
Walk in the door and
serve
and face these people, right? And so I remember that in the middle of all this chaos with VBS, I never spoke to. My assumption was, and I could be wrong, my assumption was that the elders and the leadership, senior pastor and executive pastor, had gotten together and made this decision. And I never talked to them. And I don't know if I should have just walked in. This is one of those things I wonder if this was just a mistake on my part. And I don't know if I should have just walked in. But there was a part of me that was like, if you're going to do this, you need to come talk to me.
Yeah.
You don't need to do this through somebody else. If this is the decision you want to do, and yeah, you can have my boss pass it down, but at this point, you've got to come talk to me.
Man up.
And you can't act like nothing happened. And I remember walking into a staff meeting, and spoiler alert for the rest of the story, the last thing that the senior pastor of this church said to me was, hey, like your Keens. Yeah. This was in June. I left the position in August, and that was the last thing he said to me.
Yeah, it was the only thing.
It was the only thing, because it was the only thing, and communication came through. It came through like surrogates. It was just like, okay, information was passed down. Like, oh, hey, I got a phone call. Oh, hey, he doesn't want you to do this, or hey, never was a face to face. And I know those are hard, and I have to give some compassion in the sense that that's got to be a really hard conversation to have because I've never had it before.
But he also made that choice.
He made the choice, but here's the thing. It devalued me to the point where I didn't even feel like an actual person. Right. Because I wasn't worth talking to. I felt like I was basically like a busted computer you were getting rid of. Yeah. 3 years of my life of trying to build relationships, not always doing it right with kids, obviously.
And lots of family trauma,
working my tail off. Mm-hmm. And I felt like that I was like a computer with a broken hard drive, and we're just going to move you out and replace you. Anyway, those are and that's something is I never want anybody to feel like that with me, even if I have to let somebody go. I don't want them to feel like this is something where, you don't want to be able to look them in the eye and say, hey, this is the decision we had to make, but no, you're a valued person. And I heard things later on from others like, oh yeah, people really respected you and loved you. And I'm like, yeah, but very few people ever came and said that.
Well, and I think as we tell the story, it will become evident as to why people didn't have a chance to say that, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's some of that. So anyway, this is where it just gets like there's this blur, right? I mean, I wish I could
so
go into.
So I can fill in some of the gaps.
Well, I know some of the gaps. I mean, I know the high points that we can talk about. Maybe, and if I miss one, you can fill it in.
Well, so by the end of the week, I had somebody flown in.
You did.
To assist us with literally packing up the house.
Yeah, I mean, we had to do things like make a decision that we're going to build this playground in our backyard and then let our daughter play with it for the few weeks that we had so that she can at least enjoy it because she's been watching it sitting in a box.
Yeah.
So we just kind of went other than the fact that we were having to start selling a house, or we were like, okay, some things just have to be like life is normal.
Yeah,
and so
it wasn't though.
It wasn't, but the best we can do for a 5-year-old who's looking forward to her first year of kindergarten, has visited her teacher at her new school, she's ready to go. The best we can do is build her playground in our backyard and say, hey, you've got it for 4 weeks.
And we couldn't ever afford to get one again.
And we couldn't do it again, you know? And so, or afford it, or even have the space to put one, even if we could afford it. There were times we could have, but we couldn't even we didn't have the space to put one.
Right.
And so, we did that for a while, and we had people come in and help us. And I remember that being kind of the first decision we made was we're going to go ahead and build the playground.
So a little bit of background. We had the play set. We might as well build it because the house was in a neighborhood that was very family friendly, wonderful neighborhood, amazing neighbors. Really, I think that's worth adding to the story.
Well, yeah, point. We'll get there. We'll get to that point. That's the loss part, is we lost these awesome friends and neighbors.
Yeah. But also we're talking getting into late summer. So the sales season up north is not winter.
Yeah, no, it's not winter.
We had to get on the market for at least a couple weeks worth of the good sales season.
Yeah.
Late, but good. So we had to, from the day that we were told to the day we listed it, we had 2 weeks to pull the house together to list it.
And being told that we can't tell anybody because they haven't decided how to communicate it to the church yet. And pastors are going on vacation.
Yeah,
and so
nobody's there.
Yeah, nobody's there, so we can't communicate it because we're not here. And so it's in terms of just, obviously it's inconvenient to lose your job, but it's even more inconvenient when you have to sit on it and then go to work and pretend that nothing's wrong.
We were essentially told if we told anybody, we'd be let go immediately with nothing.
Yeah. And so we had to sit there, and we did our best. And, VBS came and went. In the meantime, I was given permission to tell the people that I worked closest to, the director of middle school, told him. You just kind of, even that, and that was the first indication I had that, there's certain places that you are, and hopefully this has changed, and there are certain places you are at times, maybe not all the time, but at times where the staff structure can feel like you're an interchangeable piece. And I think this was the first moment where I felt like I'm more of an interchangeable piece than I am a person that was hired because of who I am and giftedness and whatnot. And because I can remember the very first thing, and maybe it's a natural question, and I get it is a natural question, so I don't want to put too much on the individual because I get where he was coming from. But when I told him, his first question was, what about me?
Yeah.
And then it was, are you okay?
Yeah.
And, that's a natural reaction.
Mm-hmm.
It is. It's a natural reaction. But my initial thought was, oh, this is I could come and go and it wouldn't matter. And maybe that's probably an unfair assumption.
I mean, I think that's some of that church, though. I mean, that week of VBS, when I came up the day after you got let go, and somebody I really admired looked at me and said, it's going to be okay. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, I know. It's not that big a deal. You lost your job.
I mean, I think it's just a culture.
And maybe it is. And maybe there was a certain, toughen it up. But when you've got a year-old and a 5-year-old, you're not thinking, oh, this is going to be so easy. It's not.
Yeah.
And then, you go into, and so we started the process of looking for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, you're getting with a realtor. We basically have told them, look, we can't sell a house in the wintertime. So regardless of whether you tell people or not, we're selling our house.
Right.
And we came up with a story that we were downsizing, which wasn't a lie. We were going to downsize. We were downsizing. We were not going to have a house as big as we did. We were very fortunate with the house that we had and used it as a ministry tool, but we were not going to have anything like that. And we never had anything like that again.
Right.
I'm going to work. I'm trying to get, plans in place for this massive event that's coming up. At the same time, I know like 3 people know what's going on.
Yeah.
And people are talking about the fall, like and I'm like, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. And because I can't sit there and go, I'm not going to be here.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be here. I've got to fake it. And I never lied. I never told a story. I just dodged the question.
Yeah. It wasn't for you to plan. It was for someone else to plan.
It wasn't. We'll get to that. I need more people to talk about. Anyway, I just, I lost my train of thought a little bit there, but I'll get it back. But I just remember spending a lot of time, just kind of in a lost kind of daze, because then it's like, okay, I remember now. It's kind of like, okay, so what next? Well, now I got to find a job, right? And of course, the natural thing, the natural assumption is, okay, I'm just going to start looking for churches.
Yeah.
And I learned something. This is something that I learned a couple things. Getting let go from a church without a reason is one of the hardest things to sell yourself to other churches on.
Absolutely.
Because there's just an assumption when the reason is I just don't fit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many letters I got back that said, well, you're not going to fit here either.
Right.
You're not going to be a fit for us, because it's either, there's a judgment of your, and this is before you've even had a verbal conversation with anybody. This is just an email exchange with resumes or a letter. Yeah. And it's, well, you're not going to fit us either. If this church of X amount of size or whatever doesn't think you fit, then you don't fit. And maybe there's, to a degree, some truth in that. There's a type, there's a model that maybe you don't fit. But that's incredibly discouraging. It's incredibly discouraging to sit there and every time you send, and I'm used to sending resumes off and not getting answers, but having the answer come back to be, why'd you get let go? Oh, well, you're not going to fit with us. And then looking through job descriptions, and everybody wants the same thing. Basically what they want at the time, because it was up and coming, and basically everybody wanted a Matt Chandler, and that was it for every position. And this is not a dig against Matt. He's got a very dynamic personality.
Clearly, he's a great guy, and everybody knows it.
He's a great speaker, got a dynamic personality, very loving, caring pastor. Everybody wants him. And you know what? I'm not him. I'm not. The model of youth ministry that I was a part of, I respect highly. I'm very... very, very, very appreciative of what I learned from the people who mentored me, in particular my boss at the time when I was back here in Texas, because it was relational driven youth ministry. It was about discipleship, which I think everybody says they are, but we can get into this discussion later on, and maybe that's a time to have a guest speaker. In fact, actually, we could bring a guest speaker on.
I think we're probably in 4 or 5 episodes going to be ready to start bringing on people. But it's discipleship driven, which I don't think most churches are doing well. I think they think they
think they are, and they have an old paradigm they're using, but I don't think they are. And I think that was what was kind of what they were looking for. And so anyway,
and I think we thought we were.
And I think we thought we were too. I think we thought, and I look back and I go, oh man, I was looking back at stuff that I was thinking about stuff I was doing then, going, oh, why was I doing that?
Right. Again, we made mistakes. And so I just remember going through all of these. It was interesting because I can remember going through all of these resumes and whatnot, and you would get really, really agitated when I was like, if I made it to a second step with a church, there seemed to be that our there was friction between us that we would. So I want to frame this a little bit.
Yeah.
I was essentially, from the moment Nathan was let go, was kind of pushed away from the church, I felt. And we'll go into that later, but I
don't even think it was pushed away. I think it was you just ceased to exist. I feel like that's what it was. I don't think it was like a shunning. I think they just, you just, which I think is worse.
You don't think the pastor's wives thing?
I think, no, what I think is it was an out of sight, out of mind. And so once you were out,
then I was out.
Then you were out, and there was no reason to go any further. And I know if the individuals were sitting in front of us, they would argue, and I'm sure there was nothing intentional or malicious, but that's just kind of how it was. Yeah. And I think that's the thing that made me the angriest at the time was if it had been a pushing away and we don't want to, and it was then I could get angry at them and fight back.
Almost an aggressive firing.
Yeah, and it wasn't, but it was almost a passive, like,
Right.
It's not even worth our time to get our energy up to, like, boot you out. It's just like, we'll get something better.
Yeah.
And I think that's how I felt the way they were treating you, is, we'll just get something better.
Yeah. Well, that's clearly what they wanted. I wasn't enough. Yeah.
Kim still has more feelings about this than I do.
Well, I think pastors' wives are often forgotten in the letting go by nature of they're the ones packing the house, they're the ones moving the kids, they're the ones that the husbands need time to figure things out and need some quiet and peace, and they're the ones that have to ramp up 4,000 degrees.
Well, yeah, and again, I just remember that because you're in the middle of this feeling like you've been abandoned, thrown aside, cast aside by the women that you were supposed to be the closest to you. And there were a few families that were still very close. They weren't staff families; they were youth families, and they watched out for you.
Well, but that's even. I mean, we're kind of going down the road. So
anyway, all that to say is, and we can talk about the good things kind of in the next episode. I just want to get the story out right now.
Right.
So I remember just sitting there. We fought whenever I would get to a certain point. And finally, I remember just in a bout of frustration, maybe frustration, just said, do you even want to do this anymore? Mm-hmm. And I remember your very bold answer, because it caught me off guard, as you went, no, I don't. I just want to break. I don't want to go work at a church. I don't want to be in ministry. I just want to break. And there was a great deal of divinely inspired clarity in that moment. I think that was what God needed to make me realize it's not now. Because I remember looking at you and saying, essentially, how did I say it? I think I said, then let's just move back to Texas.
Yeah. And
your agreement to that was so fast. I mean, it was like, yep. And so, I think there was a relief. There was relief because it was a decision. And I said, let's just move back to Texas. Let's move back to Flower Mound. Let's go. Let's go be a family down there. I'll find a job somewhere. I don't know what I'm going to do, but let's just go. And interestingly enough, that was first week of July. Mm-hmm. We'd already been through several weeks of this, and our house was going on the market the next day.
Yeah.
And when I said, let's go back to Flower Mound, and we agreed to do that, our house sold in the first few hours it was open. The next day, our house sold.
And it was a package, like, it worked for both parties.
Everything was perfect.
Great.
And if you wonder at times how God shows himself, that was incredibly clear to me that this is what we need to do.
Yeah, timing couldn't have been better. It put us back before school started. We had a place at my mom. She just happened to, right? I mean, she happened to have this house that was set up.
Just moved into this house that had all of this space,
so
and
it was a 2-story house. We took upstairs, she took downstairs, and still had space to spread out.
We were able to get out, and then we kind of had to make provisions. It allowed us to go in and say, hey, we just sold our house, so we got to move this thing forward.
Yeah.
And we were able to, and it was interesting that I was the one who made the communication. I wrote my own letter telling everybody what was going on. Interestingly enough, my explanation raised questions because I didn't fully understand. What does not fit mean? But it raised questions within the people of the congregation as to why Nathan's leaving. Right. And to the credit of the church and the senior pastor, they were very clear. This is nothing he did. This isn't like a moral failure. He didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
And they said that repeatedly. It was hard, though, to hear that over and over because I'm sitting there going, well, if I didn't do anything wrong, then how can I fix it? How can I get better so that the next person wants me to be there?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's important to know about that as well is that the church sees that statement as we were choosing to move on. And when they heard that, they didn't hear any of the pain or the fear that we were experiencing, and that was really frustrating on my side.
I totally get it. I mean, I had to walk in every day and just pretend like nothing was going on. And there were times where several of the guys, and I had some good friends that were part of the staff, weren't in the primary leadership necessarily, but one of them was. But they would. I remember one of them looking at me going, "Here's the thing." He said, "If the good you're doing can't be understood essentially by those at the top," he goes, "that's where you're going to struggle." And he said, "You've done a lot of good." Yeah. He said, "You've done a lot of things well here. You've changed some culture here that was good." He said, you don't have to walk away thinking that you failed." And I thought that's huge. That's huge for me. I don't know I think on one side everyone's thinking, well, we handled this really well. There wasn't contention. Ultimately.
And that was our choice to not have contention.
I think theirs too, because they could have just cut me off right there. And when the house sold, we had to kick it into overdrive, and I had to we moved back. Interesting enough, we left on August 15th, 3 years to the day that I moved out there.
Which nobody even acknowledged.
Well, we had people come and help us pack, some good friends.
Well, nobody acknowledged the date.
The date, right. Yeah, it was 3 years to the day that I got there.
Yeah.
And we headed back, and at this time I didn't have a job. I was supposed to be there till December 31st. I was looking at another fly back and forth and be in two places. And I was like, I am not doing that. I'm not doing that. And then I get the kicker that, basically I'm flying back to go teach on a Sunday, and I'm told, well, they don't want you teaching anymore.
Yeah.
So then it's like, then why am I here?
Which we could have saved a lot of money had you not had to do that.
Well, and it's like, why am I here? If I'm just here to fill a spot but not actually be part of what's going on, then I don't need to be here. And I was able to go in, and to their credit and generosity, they gave me a severance package that was very, 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 very generous. Insurance and
we reduced our spending by a tremendous amount.
Well, we did,
so that helped.
It was maybe not as big as like a corporate severance package, but it was 6 months, and I had some job interviews, and we head home. And, we talked about the last time, we named it earthquakes and aftershocks. This is the asteroid hitting the earth. Yeah. That's the catastrophic level for this, and I know I'm being melodramatic, Nathan, but in the big picture of our life together, our marriage, this was essentially the asteroid, right? I mean, people lose their jobs. We lost our job and had to move away. We had uprooted family. Yeah. We had moved away. We'd experienced, we had to go through all the trauma with your dad. And then it's like, now we got to come back. And you feel like you're coming back with your tail tucked between your legs.
Well, and I think there's a very specific difference between being let go from an IT company or a school or, any other type of work. When you're let go from a church, that's also your home. So
absolutely,
how it felt as a family, take out the staff side.
Yeah.
As a family, no matter what they said, I am not showing my face in that church again.
Yeah.
For any reason.
I mean, even if we had stayed in Pittsburgh, there was we're going to find a new church. I can't be here.
Yeah, I was not stepping back in that church. Now, I do want to spend some time talking about some of the things that happened that were such God timing and some of the people who just
and I think what I'd like to do, if you would be okay with it, I mean, we've kind of I'd like to end the story right here.
So where are we ending it?
We are ending that. I have my severance package, and we have gone home. We have come back to Texas. We have come to your mother's, and it's almost like the cavalry riding back into the fort after just a trouncing by the enemy. And they're not my enemy, but you know what I mean. We're just been defeated, and we're coming back with our tail between our legs, and it's time to lick our wounds. And I think what you're talking about, those things, it was in the licking of our wounds that we started to.
But there's some things that happened on the way out that I think are worth mentioning.
Okay. Well, I mean, if you want to go ahead and mention those right now, we can.
Okay.
Well, no, here's my thing is what I don't want. We've spent 9 years getting over this.
Yeah.
And while I do want to share it, I don't ever want us to go back into feeling like, raising these feelings again. And you very rightfully have some things that were not done well towards you that were very painful. I think this is the time to do that.
Yeah. So
I'm giving you the go ahead to do it.
Okay. Several people came up. So when it was made public, one of the things we didn't really go into detail about, we sold our house. We were getting ready to close. The church really dragged their feet on telling the rest of the church.
That is true. After the house sold, it did take several weeks before the church.
Well, the house wasn't sold yet. I mean, we had an offer.
Well, we had the offer that we had a contract that was in process.
Yeah, we had a contract in process. The house was going to close, and we were going to move in 10 days. And they still had not told the church. So it was announced on a Sunday.
Yeah. Well, actually, a letter had gone out prior to that Sunday. Yeah. So,
but it was like Saturday that the letter came
the verbal announcement. Yeah. And I had, and they gave me the opportunity to talk to my volunteer team, and I was able to tell them first.
Right.
And then we told the parents first of the youth.
So the minute that it went out, the email or what have you, about 2 hours later, there's a knock on the door. And to be honest, I had been isolated for so long. To hear a knock was unusual because nobody had come by or cared to check. So I go to the front door, and it's a staff member that had been at the church.
A former staff member.
A former staff member. And she just grabbed me and held me and let me cry. And we cried together for like 5 minutes. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, I'm not alone. I mean, that was my first time in 3 weeks that I felt like somebody understood. And that first of, okay, I can do it. Like, she's still making it. I can make it. Because they had done something similar to her, kind of all of a sudden let her go. So that was a huge, just such a blessing, right? Just
to have someone who understands.
Somebody showing up and saying it's going to be okay. So moving forward, I had a little bit of hope that if she can make it, I can make it.
Yeah, exactly.
That when they told the church, by the time it really got out, we had 5 days till we were leaving. It was very short. We were closing on a Friday and leaving right after.
Yeah, and when you're moving like this, you don't have like a moving package or anything. It's basically rent a U-Haul.
Right.
And you got to fill up a house. And we rented the biggest one you could get, the biggest truck you could get.
It's like 18 foot or 20.
No, it was 26 to 28 feet. Okay. And we couldn't fit everything. We literally were having door prizes for people who could come and help us move.
We were giving away patio furniture. We were giving away bookshelves and beds, and
we drew the line when you started giving away your dad's stuff. That was where I knew that we needed to have figure something out, because I remember somebody came up to me and said, Kim's giving away her dad's stuff.
Yeah.
And I had to go in there and take it back and stop.
I had to and I gave away things I didn't tell you about.
Yeah, I know, because you would do that.
But
because you don't always want to allow me to be the hero in these situations.
And in this situation, there was no hero. Right, we were having to get out of town.
Well, we were having to get out of town,
and that was just the reality.
Yeah, but I think that's some of the things that we look back on where, I think there are mutual mistakes we made to each other in that, and being overdwelling in my own difficulty with it and not paying attention to yours. Mm-hmm. But I think there's also a tendency, and we both know each other, you like to muscle through things and not have anybody be that hero.
Right.
And, and so that's kind of the, I go in super, super, super internal, and you go super, super, super like self-sufficient.
Right.
And,
all that being
said, it's something we learned.
Yeah. And I will probably personally send each person that showed up on that moving day a copy of this, or a link to the podcast so they understand. But every person that showed up meant the world to us.
Yeah. I mean, it was just huge. And those are the people, like, even when we returned, we did a visit. We went and saw them. Yeah. Those were the people we went and saw because
we cherished them.
Yeah. Those are the people who came to us and said, I don't want you to leave.
Yeah.
You know, and the family who took us in the very beginning, the two families who took us in, right? The two families who took us in and allowed us to live in their homes.
Yeah.
And
when everything was up in the air.
You know, we go back and we see them and just the incredible generosity there. But you know, I mean, there were instances where after it was announced, people walked up to you and said, you know, hey, I'm so excited for Nathan's new opportunity. And you're looking at him like, the one where he got fired and he had to find a new job.
Well, okay, to be fair, that was an elder's wife. And she said that, I'm so excited for you guys getting new opportunities. And I just looked at her and said, that's what happens when you get fired. And walked away.
So, there were moments where we were a little bit bitter.
Yeah.
But, you know, ultimately, I think the most awkward thing for me was that I had to come back and have a going away party. And
I didn't even get to go to the going away
party. You didn't,
party.
because you had to move back here, and we didn't have a place to stay, and you came back here. And trust me,
we couldn't afford it. I mean, that was...
You didn't miss out. I mean, while it was great to see, it was really great to see the people who came through that line, and the ones who prayed with me, and the ones who said they were sorry, and the friends we had made, and to see so many of them come and say, hey, we're really sorry, and we're going to miss you. Yeah. You know, it was the most uncomfortable thing I've ever done, because it's not like you're sitting there. It's almost like a funeral.
Yeah.
That you know, you're getting loved on by people for loss, and not potentially like, hey, we're going to miss you, but we know things that you're going to go off and have. It was just so different from when I left Texas.
Yeah.
The sadness in Texas was understandable, that like there wasn't confusion. We know what's going on.
Right.
This was like, I don't even know which way is up at this point. And that's the feeling you're dealing with while you're sitting in this receiving line, essentially. And now to this day, there were so many special moments in that receiving line.
Yeah. But I didn't even get to be.
But you didn't even get to do that. Yeah. You just left and had to, and that was it. That was what you got. You got a goodbye, and you didn't even get a goodbye from the pastors' wives.
No, but that'll come up. That's the next.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
You know, what we want to do with this is we want to sit there and maybe tell what we've learned, what we wouldn't do.
Yeah.
And maybe encourage people like, hey, if you got to do this, and we know it has to happen sometimes.
Yeah.
Don't do this.
Yeah. I think also letting some of these families understand that they're not alone.
Yeah.
I mean, the story is hard to listen to, and it's hard to understand some of the dynamics.
And it's hard to talk about without falling back into those feelings of anger, you know?
But to know if one family hears this and they're like, oh, this is a thing that happens. This is real life in ministry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, we'll leave it. We'll leave it at this. We are at 47 minutes. This is a pretty good lengthy episode.
Yeah. And congratulations if you've listened.
If you've listened this far, we've got at least 2 more episodes.
If you've listened this far, I will buy you a Snickers.
Yeah, if you've listened this far, Kim will buy you a Snickers. Just email us at podcastinglees@gmail.com. Or the podcast.
But you'll have to wait. You'll have to wait till Corona is over.
Corona is over. So
and then I can find one, because the stores are bare.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, we'll pick it up next time, and continue to just love one another, pray for each other. This Corona thing is crazy.
Yeah, stay safe, guys.
If you're in
we're well past it by now. So
if you're a ministry worker, we get it. We know your pain right now, because we're trying to figure out how to do church in a completely new paradigm.
Holy cow!
And we just wish you guys the best. Hey, we appreciate you guys listening. If you do us a favor, if you're listening to us on iTunes or one of the other platforms, shoot us a review. Tell us what we're doing right. Tell us what we're doing wrong. What we can do better. Give us something to talk about.
Yeah, ask questions.
Ask questions. We're happy to talk about it, but it just makes us get better, and that's what we want to do. Is we want to do this really well. So, we will definitely have more time to record, and hopefully they'll come out a little bit quicker while we're in our lockdown. So, until next time, this is Nathan.
And this is Kim.
And you guys have a great quarantine.